And we are back for prepping for winter with the Barristan sample chapter. Barristan is preparing for the Battle of Fire, an event that has numerous parallels to other battles, including the Battle of Ice, Blood and Steel, as well as the Battle of the Blackwater. Much like Hosteen Frey's army up north, Barristan prepares to ride forth to meet a much larger host rather than stay behind walls. Up north, this is due to famine. Here, it's due to pestilence. And now let's continue. The Stormcrows had assembled beneath the Merchant's Arcade, fronting on the southern side of the square, where the arches gave them some protection from the dead men. Jokin's archers were fitting strings to their bows as Sir Barristan rode by. The Widower sat grim-faced astride a gaunt grey horse, with his shield upon his arm and his spiked battle-axe in hand. A fan of black feathers sprouted from one temple of his iron half-helm. The boy beside him was clutching the company's banner, a dozen ragged black streamers on a tall staff, topped by a carved wooden crow. So here we hear of the Stormcrows, a sellsword company of 500 horse, formerly led by Daario Naharis. Now with Daario gone, two men named the Widower and Jokin have taken control of the company as joint commanders. Now this is a rather interesting move, as prior to Daario's coup, the company was run on a system of joint command with Daario, Salor the Bald, and Prendel Nog Rezin sharing command. It's notable that they've gone back to a joint command structure, albeit with only 2 instead of 3. Perhaps they assume Daario is the third. Now the Widower is a bold, perhaps reckless character, claiming Barristan's diplomatic efforts were useless, calling Barristan Sir Grandfather, and wanting to use the Unsullied as fodder essentially. Jokin the Archer we know little about. It is of great significance that if Barristan falls, command falls to the Widower, this reckless character, and then to Jokin, a character we know nothing about. Now Daario is of course currently a hostage, though I see no real reason why these two men would care about his return. Daario is ruthless and untrustworthy, violating the traditions of the company, and we have heard of no reasons why the Widower or Jokin would feel any loyalty to him. Now in this passage we also hear of a banner boy holding a carved wooden crow on a staff with black streamers. Now, as I've mentioned earlier, up at the Battle of Ice, the Frey army is carrying the head of Mor's Crowfoot Umber. However, there is a bit more to it than that. The head is old, white, one-eyed, and on a weirwood spear. It is a clear reference to Bloodraven, and here we have a wooden crow on a staff with black streamers. This also seems to be a reference to Bloodraven, as he is the three-eyed crow and is now a tree. That is wood. Not that these groups of people are necessarily aligned or connected or anything like that, but our author does like to throw around parallel imagery to remind us of various characters. And speaking of parallel characters, it should be noted that we only know of 4 Stormcrows: Daario, a Tyrashi sellsword, a sour axe-wielding man named the Widower, Jokin the Archer, and a banner-holding boy. And this reminds us of the non-Lady Stoneheart faction of the Brotherhood Without Banners. Its members are Greenbeard, a Tyrashi sellsword, a sour axe-wielding widower named the Mad Huntsman, Angai the Archer, and the boy Edric Dane. Edric was likely the one holding the group's banner at the Mummer's Ford, as he was not fighting. Now just to clarify, I do not think that the Stormcrows are the missing Brotherhood faction, but it's rather clear that our author is referencing them for some reason, with the use of a Tyrashi sellsword, a sour widower axeman, an archer, and a boy. The Horse Lords had come as well. Aggo and Rakaro had taken most of the Queen's small Khalasar across the Skahazadan, but the old half-crippled Jakaran Romo had scraped together 20 riders from those left behind. Some were as old as he was, many marked by some old wound or deformity. The rest were beardless boys, striplings, seeking their first bell and the right to braid their hair. They milled about near the weathered bronze statue of the Chainmaker, anxious to be off, dancing their horses aside whenever a corpse came spinning down from above. So Dany has 3 blood riders, Jogo, Aggo, and Rakaro, and a Khalasar of a little over 100 that she won at the end of a Game of Thrones. After Dany's disappearance, Aggo and Rakaro took the able-bodied Dothraki off to find her, while Jogo is currently a hostage of the Yunkai, and so with the 3 blood riders gone, the old squinty-eyed Romo is now in charge of the remaining Khalasar of old men and green boys. Now, it's curious that any time is given to this lot. As a point of comparison, the Stormcrows are 500 seasoned fighters in their prime, and the Unsullied are 5,000 hardened soldiers. These are 20 crappy fighters, old, crippled, or green. And so we have to wonder, why are they even being mentioned? Now, I will say that the Dothraki are a bit different from everyone else in their motivation. As I mentioned, the Unsullied would like their captive hero back, but they follow orders and are clearly part of Barristan's battle plan. And the Stormcrows probably don't care about their captive Daario and might even prefer if he were not retrieved. The Dothraki are different. They care about their captives. In fact, it's likely all they care about. Let's keep in mind, the Khalasar is sworn to Dany, but when a Dothraki leader is gone, loyalty and command do not automatically transfer to someone else. We saw this with Drogo's Khalasar falling apart. There is no order of succession. So Barristan's plans are likely of little importance to them. He's not their leader. So why are they here? Well, in the Queen's Hand chapter, Romo tells us that the honor of the Khalasar demands Jogo be freed, as he has the blood of Dany's blood. Romo's Khalasar is honor-bound to free Jogo. It's likely the only thing on their minds. They even seem anxious about it. So while Barristan is off fighting a battle, Romo and company will likely be doing their own thing. They'll be searching for the captives. Now, Romo's profession is repeatedly referenced. He's a Jaqaran, a mercy man. He goes around battlefields killing the dying. And so I do wonder if he's going to be giving the gift of mercy to any significant characters in our story. Now, interestingly enough, the Dothraki are hanging near a statue called the Chainmaker. I assume this is some sort of god or deity. We are told that everyone is gathered in the old slave exchange, so the Chainmaker seems to be some sort of character related to slavery and mythology. It should be noted that back in A Dance with Dragons, Xaro Zoandaxis tells us that Dothraki make slaves while Giscari train them. So it's striking that the Dothraki, the makers of slaves, are near the Chainmaker statue. Not that Romo and company will ever make slaves again, but it does remind us that other Dothraki are out there. Dany tells us that after Khal Drogo died, his Khalasar broke into two. Khal Pono leads one part, Khal Jaqo the other. Khal Pono definitely has the larger Khalasar, and it numbers 30,000. He was last said to be near the headwaters of the Selhoru River. And while he might be heading to Volantis, it wouldn't be unheard of for him to double back to Meereen. After all, Dothraki's strategy is to approach a city, receive a bribe, and then go away. We have no real evidence that he's actually going to attack Volantis. Interestingly enough, Pono is talked about right before a catapult is used to take a dragon in a game of Syvas. This is essentially the Yunkish plan, to take down Meereen and its dragons with trebuchets. The other major Khalasar is Khal Jaqo, who Dany stumbles upon at the end of A Dance with Dragons. His horde is much closer to Meereen, though Dany still has an unfulfilled vision of Vaes Dothrak, so it seems that at least she will be heading there. Perhaps after capturing Dany, Jaqo realizes Meereen's weakness and heads south. We also hear some minor Khalasars, Khal Zekko and Khal Motho. They were last heard of heading to Qohor fleeing Pono, but that was fairly early in A Dance with Dragons, so who knows where they are now. Nonetheless, George R. R. Martin does love to have surprise armies show up to battles, and with so many parallels to the Battle of the Blackwater, it seems rather likely that some army will come in near the end. That said, the Skahazaddan River is a barrier for any army invading from the north. Not far from them, about the ghastly monument the Great Masters called the Spire of Skulls, several hundred pit fighters had gathered. Selmy saw the spotted cat amongst them. Beside him stood fearless Ethok, and elsewhere, Cenera She-Snake, Cameron of the Count, the Brindled Butcher, Togash, Marigo, Orlos the Catamite. Even Gogor the Giant was there, towering above the others like a man amongst boys. Freedom means something to them after all, it would seem. The pit fighters had more love for Hisdar than they ever had shown Daenerys, but Selmy was glad to have them all the same. Some are even wearing armor, he observed. Perhaps his defeat of Kraz had taught them something. Next we hear of several hundred pit fighters. Now, as noted by Barristan, the pit fighters were loyal to Hisdar, who Barristan imprisoned. It's also worth noting again that the famous pit fighter Kraz was killed by Barristan while Barristan wore armor. A shameful win. And on top of this, the famous pit fighter Barcena Blackhair was eaten by Drogon. So the pit fighters definitely have their issues with Barristan, even though, yes, they also likely hate the Yunkai too and don't want to be re-enslaved. So we specifically hear of the Spotted Cat, Gogor the Giant, and Cameron of the Count. They all sat on Barristan's council and were previously Hisdar's personal guard. We also see fearless Ethok, who has a prominent voice amongst the pit fighters as well. The rest, Cenera She-Snake, the Brindled Butcher, Togash, Marigo, and Orlos the Catamite, are all new to us. A Catamite, by the way, is a boy prostitute. Now strikingly, some prominent pit fighters are absent. The big one is Be'lakor Bonebreaker. He came with Hisdar to argue for the opening of the pits, was part of Hisdar's personal guard, was spoken of repeatedly at the fighting pits and was supposed to fight Gogor, and notably, he was on Barristan's council. And yet today, Be'lakor is absent. And another major pit fighter missing is Steelskin. We aren't sure where these pit fighters are, but it's rather alarming considering that Be'lakor was on Barristan's council and has inside information on his military tactics. Now here Barristan actually comments on the armor situation. Again, it's worth noting that the pit fighters think armor is cowardly. Some are wearing armor, which means the story of how Kraz died made it to the pit fighters. Notably, it was Steelskin, one of the missing pit fighters, who actually witnessed the death of Kraz and would have passed on the story. Still, while Barristan thinks it's a positive thing that some are wearing armor, we should remember that most are not. Most still think armor is cowardly, which means most think that Barristan killed Kraz in a dishonorable fashion. Above, the gatehouse battlements were crowded with men in patchwork cloaks and brazen masks. The Shavepate had sent his brazen beasts onto the city walls to free up the Unsullied to take the field. Should the battle be lost, it would be up to Skahaz and his men to hold Meereen against the Yunkai, until such time as Queen Daenerys could return, if indeed she ever does. So Barristan has entrusted the city to the brazen beasts, which means he may have handed the city to Skahaz. Skahaz is a Shavepate, meaning he's a revolutionary. Traditional Meereenese wear long hair and fanciful designs. Shavepates are for a completely new path, and thus they shave their heads symbolically. Hisdar, a man of compromise, keeps his hair at medium length. Now the Brazen Beasts are composed of one half Shavepate and one half Freedman, so at least half of the Brazen Beasts are loyal to Skahaz. Now Skahaz has a completely different idea on how to handle Meereen from Dany or Barristan. He wants Hisdar dead and wants to execute members of the Great Master families, particularly children, in order to keep them in line. And so as Barristan leaves, these Great Masters could be at Skahaz's mercy. We should remember that at least one child from each Great Master family is a hostage at the Great Pyramid. If he can control the Brazen Beasts, he can close the doors behind Barristan's forces and never let them back into the city, if he wants. Then again, his control over the Brazen Beasts is a big if. As I said, half the Brazen Beasts are Shavepates, but the other half are Freedmen. We have no idea if these Freedmen Brazen Beasts will follow an order to backstab Barristan, and I'm inclined to think they won't. Additionally, there are 3,000 missing Unsullied somewhere unaccounted for, and of course the Sons of the Harpy, if real, would be a barrier to the Brazen Beasts' takeover. If Skahaz is planning his own coup, it seems that there will be a war within the walls of Meereen. And considering Meereen's twin, Winterfell, also has factions at each other's throats within the walls, I would say war inside Meereen is rather probable. Now regarding the division within the Brazen Beasts, it's notable that their masks are varied. And in A Dance with Dragons, Barristan wonders if these animal masks have any meaning. And I would say they likely do. The night of Barristan's coup, it's worth noting that all the beasts wore locust masks. It seems the locusts are the ones that are most loyal to Skahaz, that is, the Shavepates, and the other animal faces are likely the Freedmen. If a coup does occur, I could see the Shavepates getting in a surprise attack on the Freedmen. The Shavepates would know their enemy, while the Freedmen would initially be very confused. Across the city at other gates, others' forces had assembled. Tal Torek and his stalwart shields had gathered by the Eastern Gate, sometimes called the Hill Gate or the Kizai Gate, since travelers bound for Lhazaar via the Kizai Pass always left that way. Marcellin and the Mother's men had massed beside the South Gate, the Yellow Gate. The Free Brothers and Simon Stripeback had drawn the North Gate, fronting on the river. They would have the easiest egress, with no foe before them but a few ships. The Yunkishmen had placed 2 Giscari legions to the north, but they were camped across the Skahazadan, with the whole width of the river between them and the walls of Meereen. So next we hear about what's going on at the other gates with the 3 military companies that Dany formed. We have little idea about the sizes of these companies, though later in the Tyrion chapter we hear about one of them, the Mother's Men, easily breaking the long lances, and they are about 800 horse strong, so I imagine these companies are of a considerable size, certainly hundreds of men each, perhaps more. Now as I said last time, Barristan is heading out of the West Gate, and Tyrion is south of that West Gate. Victarion, if coming into the story, is coming in from the west, and so we have quite a bit of blindness regarding these other gates, especially the northern and eastern fronts. So at the Eastern Gate, the one that was actually bashed down during Dany's assault in A Storm of Swords, is where Tal Torek and the Stalwart Shields are. The company is named for the murdered Unsullied in A Dance with Dragons, Stalwart Shield becoming a martyr for them. And the company's commander, Tal Torek, is a new commander as the clever Malono Yas-Dab died from the Pale Mare. And so the implication is a less clever newbie now runs the company. We know that the stalwart shields are eager for battle, and Tal Torek actually suggested attacking Yun Kai as it's largely undefended. And so everything about the company seems to point to it being rash and hell-bent on revenge more than anything else. Yun Kai being undefended is an interesting parallel to the Battle of Ice, where the Dreadfort remains undefended. The question is, what force is free to take either city? We are reminded that Lazar is to the east, and they do technically have an alliance with Dany. Although not a martial people, the Lazarene are in a perfect position to take Yun Kai. Though really a number of groups could also take the city, though it's notable that Tal Torek is the one that came up with the plan for Yun Kai, and he's at the Kizai Gate, which invokes Lazar. At the North Gate we have Simon Stripeback and the Free Brothers. He's also a bit of a rash character, and his men are also eager for battle. He wanted the Unsullied to be divided up to stiffen his men, so it seems he fears his men are undisciplined. They face no enemies to the north except ships, at least currently. Across the river are 2 Giscari legions, which reminds us of Stannis' men being across the river during the Battle of the Blackwater. With this parallel, we should perhaps watch for bridges or ferrying happening to get men across the river to face the Free Brothers. At the South Gate we have Marcellin and the Mother's men. Marcellin is Missandei's brother and was an Unsullied. He is pretty obedient to Dany, and I assume in turn Barristan. During Barristan's council, Marcellin is as cautious as Barristan, wanting to use the Unsullied to protect flanks, and he is notably not eager for battle like the Free Brothers and the Stalwart Shields. And so all in all, we can see that the more reckless commanders and less disciplined companies are at the northern and eastern gates, our blind area, while the western and southern gates have the more experienced and controlled commanders. And in fact, later on in the Tyrion chapter, we do find that Barristan and Marcellin are doing well in battle. And we know nothing of Simon Stripeback and Tal Torek. I would say it's rather probable that the 2 companies are not doing as well. And this is a good place to stop. We'll continue on next time with Barristan 1 Part 3. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.